Join the conversation at 1-800-765-8255. This is the Talk of the Town.
Get to those other couple of charter amendments that are also on the agenda tonight in just a couple of minutes. Also tonight is the vice presidential debate. J.D. Vance, Tim Walz, they will be going head-to-head tonight to CBS News moderating that debate. Joining us is political science professor at Fairmont State University, friend of the show, Robert Bolton. Robert, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Dave. I'm doing great. Glad to be back on. Usually,
vice presidential debates, they're reserved for the political nerds. They can be interesting, maybe not really considered that consequential. This one's getting some attention. Why is this one different in this election cycle?
Well, typically what happens in these presidential debates is you're going to have 3 presidential debates, and then you're going to have 1 vice presidential debate. In this case, because of Joe Biden dropping out of the race after his disastrous debate performance, and then the tensions that were very obvious between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in their first debate, President Trump has declined to engage in a second debate with Vice President Harris. So this is really going to be the last opportunity for either party to make their pitch to the voters before they go to the ballot box in November.
What will you be watching for tonight?
The main thing I'm going to try and see from both sides is to dispel any conceptions one way or the other on one side or the other. In regard to J.D. Vance, I'm going to try to dispel the label that Tim Walz had against them that Mr. Vance and Mr. Trump are quote-unquote weird. And then in regard to if I'm J.D. Vance making my pitch, I'm going to try and cast Kamala Harris and Mr. Walz as very far left and out of step with Americans. If I'm Mr. Walz trying to make my argument, I'm going to try and, again, reinforce that perception of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance as out of touch with Americans, and make the argument that continuity with Kamala Harris and Mr. Walz would be better.
Robert Bolton joining us, political science professor at Fairmont State University. Robert, is this one of those instances where both campaigns, to put it bluntly, are telling their candidate, just don't screw it up? You can do more damage than good here tonight?
Typically, Vice President, for the screw-ups that you see in them than anything else. Back in 1988, Lloyd Benson notably describing Dan Quayle as, "Sir, you're no Jack Kennedy." Or in 1992, James Stockdale, who was Ross Perot's vice presidential nominee, appeared very out of touch and maybe even a little suffering from a brief bout of senility in his first debate. So absolutely, typically this is something where you either want to do damage control if it's a situation where one candidate or the other in a presidential candidate did a bad performance, but more often it's memorable for a vice presidential candidate ending up with egg on their face.
Read some stories this morning. CBS News has said they're not going to attempt to fact check in real time the candidates as this goes on. The candidates can fact check themselves. Do you like that approach from the moderators, or do you prefer, and I guess this is just a personal opinion on your part, do you prefer the approach that ABC took with the Harris-Trump debate?
I personally think that moderators have no business fact-checking one side or the other. The first occasion you really saw something like that become prominent was during the dispute over whether or not President Obama described something as an act of terror or a terrorist attack back during the 2012 debate against Mitt Romney. And in the case of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, notably, Donald Trump was fact-checked 5 times by the moderators, while Vice President Harris was not fact-checked at all, even though both of them at different points either said misstatements or outright lies. I think, and quite frankly, a lot of the things that moderators I've seen in the past attempting to fact-check are very subjective things. You need to leave it to the opposing candidate to do the work. You should not be trying to weigh in one side or the other. Now, one thing I will say that they are doing is there will be a QR code listed at the bottom of the screen where there will be a web link that you can look in real time and see the facts of both candidates. I think that's much better because you'll have an entire newsroom staff able to provide information on both candidates rather than relying on a moderator's knowledge or judgment for one side or the other. But in short, yes, no, I absolutely think that moderators should not be fact-checking one candidate or the other. Their role should be limited to asking the questions and keeping the candidates within the time frame and allowing, if there's interruptions, putting an end to that. That should be their role.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I'm all for tough questions and follow-up questions where, if the candidate completely sidesteps the question to press them, I have no problems with any of that. That's the point. But to do the other candidate's job and go, well, actually, you're wrong. Personally, I have a lot of faith in the audience. I have a lot of faith in my audience that I'm talking to right now, Robert, that if somebody says something that's totally false, they can recognize that. They can see that. They can they're able to comprehend that without somebody having to point that out to them. I have faith that people can actually see lies for what they are. So if candidates are telling lies. So
absolutely. I mean, we live in a democracy. We do not want our American citizens being bottle fed. They should go out and do the work themselves, research the positions on both candidates, and research the facts. That's what they should be doing, because when you take what either the media or anyone else, be it a candidate or anyone else, says at face value all the time, well, the quality you're going to get is usually pretty poor.
Robert, I said in the opening of the show that there's been nothing normal about this election cycle. So why would we expect a usual, boring, old, normal vice presidential debate? Why would we expect that tonight when nothing else has been normal this election cycle? So I'm kind of expecting something to happen one way or the other.
Absolutely. I think that both sides recognize this is going to be their last real opportunity to make a closing argument to the American people, because as I noted at the beginning of our discussion, typically there's at least one additional presidential debate after the VP debate, but that's not going to happen here. So since this is their last opportunity, I think both of them are maybe going to be a bit more willing to throw elbows than they normally would. Up until this point, Tim Walz has tried to cast this folksy demeanor of he's, just a regular good old Midwestern coach. And J.D. Vance has tried to avoid that Ivy League pedigree that he's relatively well known for. Both of them want to show that they are in touch with the common man, that they both have come from relatively lower middle class or maybe even impoverished circumstances and have rised up, because quite frankly, the vast majority of Americans have already made up their mind who they're voting for. Both sides are making their pitch to that remaining 5, maybe 10% of undecided voters who are out there.
Robert Bolton, political science professor at Fairmont State University. Robert, we'll be watching and see what happens tonight.
Absolutely. It's guaranteed to be fun. Take care, Dave.
You too. Thank you very much. Robert Bolton, political science professor, Fairmont State University. Got some text to get to, and I want to just quickly go over those final few amendments to the city charter that will be discussed later tonight. The last four, not as consequential, not as headline grabbing. We'll talk about that next. 9:43. Back in a moment.